Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today I want to talk about this idea that comes up pretty much every time I take a look at an anti-tank rifle. And that is, why didn't they use them as sniper rifles? Why did nobody go and put, a nice telescopic sight on an anti-tank rifle and use it for sniping? And it's an idea that comes up like with great regularity every time one of the anti-tank rifles comes up. And I think it is largely fueled by video games, but let's assess, why didn't they do that? And first off, there are a few exceptions. So there were a few times when guns like this were used in let's call it a precision marksman sort of role. And I'm just going to preempt everybody here by starting out referencing Carlos Hathcock getting what was for a couple decades the world record longest sniper shot with a Browning M2 50 caliber heavy machine gun that he had mounted an 8-power universal scope on. Yes, that absolutely happened. However, that's not quite what we're talking about here. That's not really taking the Browning M2 heavy machine gun and turning it into a sniper rifle. That is taking a gun that was a perimeter defense emplaced weapon that never moved, and basically getting bored and deciding to see how accurate it could be. And maybe someone would walk into its field of fire, and someone did. And he got a 2,500-yard sniper shot in the Vietnam War. He wasn't the only person to do that. It was done in Korea as well as Vietnam. And what the situation for these sorts of events was basically emplaced American bases that had Browning 50s on tripods with a nice fine adjust T&E mechanism that were sitting around at fixed points, and snipers and armorers who had nothing better to do deciding to try and tinker with these things and see what they could get out of them. I actually had the pleasure of knowing one of the guys who is in here mentioned as being one of the guys in Korea who was experimenting with mounting scopes on 50s. And there's a picture in here of him, Bob Ferris, mounting a 20-power spotting scope, not a sniper scope, mind you, but a spotter's scope onto a Browning 50. So that did happen, but because that rifle never moves, that's really not what we're talking about. The concept that people have in mind when they make this suggestion, or when they ask about this, is let's say a boy's anti-tank rifle, put a scope on it, and now you can issue it to a sniper who can crawl around in the mud with it and, shoot some dude 1,500 yards away. So why didn't this happen? Well, let's look at the primary purpose of a sniper rifle. It is accuracy. And in order to get that, you need the weapon to be repeatably accurate. You need the ammunition to be repeatably accurate. And we're kind of even going to overlook this. You have to get the gun to where it needs to make the shot. A boy's anti-tank rifle is, if my memory serves me, 36 pounds. There better be a really good benefit that you get from that over, say, a 10-pound number 4 Mark II or a number 4T Enfield to justify carrying an extra 26 pounds of gun around in the field. The ammo, by the way, is correspondingly heavier as well. You're not carrying all that much 55 boys ammo on you. So the rifles in these cases were mostly pretty darn accurate guns, or at least they had the potential to be if they had been manufactured for that purpose. Like if they took the time and the care in making the barrels and making the bolts and fitting everything together, yeah, you could have something like a boy's anti-tank rifle that is very supremely accurate. But they didn't take the time to do that because it cost time and money, and it wasn't important really to the rifle's actual role, which was an anti-tank rifle, or by later in the war, an anti-material rifle for shooting at light armored vehicles, aircraft on runways, that sort of thing. More importantly, I think, in order to be a viable sniper's rifle, in order to be a very accurate rifle, you have to have very consistent, accurate ammunition. Doesn't matter how good the gun is, it will only shoot as consistently as the ammunition in it. And that requires a number of things. Consistent pressure, which means you have to have a very consistent shape of the brass. The internal volume of the brass has to be exactly the same every single shot, or else your chamber pressure will be different, which will cause the shot to go slightly differently. You have to have a consistent powder charge. That's kind of an obvious one. You have to have a consistently manufactured bullet, because if the bullet doesn't always spin about the exact center of its axis, or if it's, if the weight is a little bit different, or the composition is a little bit different, and the center of balance of the bullet is a little bit different, all of those things will impede accuracy. Anti-tank rifles, naturally, were supplied primarily with armor-piercing ammunition, which means you don't just have a lead bullet with a jacket on it, which is relatively easy to make very consistently. You have a three-part bullet. You have a hardened armor-piercing core in the middle, and then you've got lead outside of that, and then you've got a jacket. And making those hardened cores very consistent is difficult, and it's something that wasn't particularly important. These rifles were they were usually equipped with iron sights. And just to continue using the boys as an example here, it has a maximum sight range of 500 meters. So, you don't need super accurate ammunition at 500 meters to hit a tank that is the size of, bigger than the size of a large SUV today. And they weren't trying to make pinpoint shots. They were trying to hit the tank, which is this huge thing. The scopes, the guns that were equipped with scopes, for example, the Solothurn S18, we're not talking about high magnification scopes. We're talking about scopes that aren't really there to make a more precise shot. They're there to be able to better identify what it is that you're looking at and find a target. So the Solothurn had a 2.5 power scope on it, and that's pretty typical. The Lati had no scope on it. The German tank Gewehr from World War I, iron sights only. The Polish anti-tank rifle, the Mareczek 35, iron sights only. What other ones am I missing here? Those are the basic ones right there. The German Panzerbuchse, iron sights only. So it's really actually only the Solothurn that came equipped with a telescopic sight, and it was only 2.5 power. So why not add one on? Well, let's set aside the idea that your ammunition isn't going to give you super precision accuracy. Let's say hypothetically it does. Okay, so you want to put a scope on to be able to achieve a longer effective range and spot targets better. That makes sense in a sniper sort of role. Well, think about the scopes that are available at the time that there are anti-tank rifles, which is to say 1930s into early 1940s. By the way, the two obviously that I'm leaving out here are the PTRS and the PTRD, both iron sights only. Anyway, think about the scopes. Would you take a scope from the 1940s, just a commercial one, let's say a commercial Weaver scope, and throw it on an FN SCAR and expect it to survive? The FN SCAR is known for being pretty brutal on optics, and it's a semi-auto 308. Imagine that you're going to put that scope on a 55 Boys or a 14.5 millimeter PTRS. How long do you think that scope, made in 1935, 1940, 1945, how long do you think that scope's actually going to last? The answer is not long. Rifles like that have intense recoil. Virtually all of them that were in really serious use, in highly numerous use, most of them were single-shot rifles. They were not semi-automatic or manual repeaters, but didn't have a lot in the way of recoil mechanisms to absorb that energy. The Boys had a little bit of a buffer. The PTRD was semi-auto. The Lati and the Solothurn were semi-auto. But consider the Boys, consider the PTRS, consider the tank Gewehr, the Mareczek, the Panzerbuchse. Those things are just going to annihilate scopes. When it comes to inherent accuracy of the guns, these are typically guns that had pretty over-bore cartridges. They're trying to get maximum velocity out of them to achieve the best possible armor penetration, and they're not that concerned about barrel life. So you have cartridges like the Soviet 14.5. The 8mm round that the Panzerbuchse shoots looks like a joke round. It looks like this gigantic cannon cartridge neck down to 8mm to get a very high muzzle velocity. These things are going to erode throats very quickly. They're going to erode the rest of the barrel as well, and you're going to see accuracy fall off pretty darn quickly. It doesn't give you a lot of opportunity to go out on the practice range and learn very precise shooting with one of these guns, which is what's necessary to make a precision shot with it, as opposed to hitting a tank the size of a bus. If we continue, I guess that's most of the issues right there. It is your ammunition's not really accurate enough to do the job. The gun is so heavy, in fact, that's what we should circle back to, is now that you've got this gun that is more powerful, it's firing a much larger bullet, call it 5 times more mass in the bullet, what does that actually get you? Is that worth carrying around a rifle that's 3 times heavier than a regular sniper rifle, or perhaps even more? The answer is it doesn't really get you anything. You're not increasing your range because you're not increasing the distance at which you can actually see and engage targets. Snipers who do that today are doing so with really, really improved optics compared to 75 years ago. There's this video game thing of like, a regular rifle bullet will only do X damage, but the gigantic anti-tank rifle bullet will do 3 times as much damage, and thus you can kill a guy with 1 hit, unlike a regular sniper rifle. Well, in the real world, getting hit with a regular rifle is going to end your day on an actual battlefield. You hit a guy in a sniping sort of sense, at long range, he's no longer a threat. Job is done if you hit him. You don't have to try and hit him with a 700 grain 50 BMG projectile. And I think that's where the big misconception really comes from. Right, 308, 8 millimeter, those do the job just as well on a person as 50 BMG 14.5. The overkill doesn't buy you anything. And it means that you have to carry around a tremendous amount more weight. You can't carry nearly as much ammo because your ammo always 5 or 10 times as much as regular rifle cartridges. And frankly, even just the idea of trying to make precise shots with some of these guns, as someone who has actually fired a Lati and a Solothurn and a Tank Gewehr, I can tell you that the recoil will make you flinch very quickly. The triggers on these guns are typically atrocious. If you approach one of these like, I'm going to use this as a sniper rifle, the Solothurn has a trigger that is so heavy that it's designed to use 2 fingers to pull it. And that's because they didn't want an accidental discharge with a 20 millimeter cannon. They want you to make sure that you're really ready and you really intend to fire that thing before you crank off a round. So even if you did go so far as to take it in the field, deal with the ammunition issues, you're still going to have a far harder time making a precise hit with one of those rifles because they just aren't designed for it. So in a nutshell, that is why, well, not in a nutshell, in an extended, overly long video explanation, that is why there were no anti-tank sniper rifles.